After my death, please examine my brain. This wasn't the last wish of a victim. It was the note left behind by the man about to commit one of the deadliest school shootings in history, moments before he pulled the trigger. Charles Whitman, an Eagle Scout, a U.S. Marine, a model citizen. And yet, just 24 hours later, he became the Texas Tower Sniper. On the morning of August 1st, 1966, when he climbed that tower, he wasn't just carrying his rifles. Inside his skull, climbing up right there with him, was something else. Something growing silently, insidiously, hijacking his mind. 96 minutes of pure terror. 16 dead, 31 wounded. The police thought they had stopped a monster that day, but on the autopsy table, as the scalpel cut into his skull, the truly terrifying reality was revealed. Was it really Charles who pulled the trigger that day, or was it that intruder living inside his brain? On the morning of August 1st, 1966, the sun rose over Austin, Texas, with its usual scorching heat. Temperatures were already approaching 100 degrees. The campus was covered in that lazy, heavy atmosphere, typical of summer school students, professors out for lunch, and tourists. Everything looked as ordinary and peaceful as a postcard. No one could have guessed that this day would change American criminal history forever. When the clock struck 11:48, there was movement atop the massive structure rising in the very heart of the campus, the clock tower. Over the stone balustrade of the observation deck, a cold metallic barrel extended, glinting in the sun. And then, that first crack cut through the silence of the campus like a knife. At first, people thought it was construction noise or a car backfiring. Some even waved up at the tower. But when those who fell to the pavement didn't get back up, the horror of reality spread in waves. For the next 96 minutes, that tower turned into a fortress in the sky, an unreachable killing machine. The man up there was a 25-year-old engineering student named Charles Whitman. Down below, it was total chaos. Police, civilians, students, everyone was a target for that invisible, godlike power looking down from above. When it was over, when Whitman was finally neutralized by the police, 16 people were dead and 31 were wounded. This went down in the records as modern history's first mass school shooting. That day, not only innocent people died, that day, innocence itself died. But when the smoke cleared and the bodies were removed, a much bigger, much darker question remained, far beyond police reports and shell casings. Who was this man? And more importantly, why?
When the news broke, everyone expected the same profile: an outcast, a loner, perhaps a thug with a long criminal record, a monster. But when journalists started digging into Charles Whitman's past, the picture they found shocked them. Whitman didn't fit the monster profile. On the contrary, he was the poster boy for the American dream. As a youth, he was a disciplined and bright kid who became one of America's youngest Eagle Scouts. He served as a Marine, earned a sharpshooter's badge, and served his country with honor. He was handsome, blonde hair, blue eyes, a face that smiled in every photo, radiating confidence. He worked at a bank, studied engineering, and volunteered. His neighbors described him as polite, respectful, and great with kids. Even his wife, Kathy, was a teacher, and they seemed deeply in love. In short, Whitman was a child of sunny suburbs, not dark alleyways. He could have been any one of our neighbors, our friends, or our brothers. And that is exactly what made this so terrifying. If a perfect man like Charles Whitman could become the architect of such brutality overnight, then is evil really a monster we search for on the outside? Or is it a sleeper cell inside all of us, just waiting for the right trigger? The clues to Whitman's horrific transformation were hidden not in the outside world, but in his inner world, in the dark corridors of his mind.
In the weeks leading up to the event, Whitman had started to change. But this transformation didn't resemble the calculated plans of a villain. It looked more like the desperate thrashing of a man losing his mind. In his diary, he wrote about unbearable headaches that he couldn't cope with. Even more terrifying, he wrote that he was fighting against irrational violent impulses bubbling up from within. Once, he wept for hours simply because he felt an overwhelming urge to break things, to destroy. He was becoming a stranger to his own mind. He was sitting in the captain's chair, but someone else had the wheel. And on that fateful night, Whitman sat down at his typewriter. Just before killing his mother and his beloved wife, he typed out one of the saddest and most baffling suicide notes in history. The letter wasn't a confession, it was a cry for help. It read, "I don't really understand myself these days. I was a reasonable and intelligent young man, but lately I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts." And the most striking part of the letter was at the very end. Could a killer want to serve science even after death? Whitman concluded with this: "After my death, please perform an autopsy on me to see if there is any visible physical disorder, because I cannot find any other explanation for my actions."
Police and doctors honored Whitman's final request. His body was taken to the morgue, the skull was carefully opened with a surgical saw, and when pathologists delved deep into the brain, they saw it. Whitman was right. There was something there that shouldn't have been. Deep within his brain, right beneath the thalamus, a tumor the size of a coin had taken root. A glioblastoma multiforme, one of the most aggressive, fastest-spreading types of brain tumors known to medicine. But the issue wasn't just the presence of the tumor, it was its location. In neurology, location is everything. The tumor was pressing against one of the most primitive, most vital parts of the brain, the amygdala. The amygdala is our alarm system. It is where fear, rage, aggression, and the fight-or-flight response are generated. Think of it as the emergency button in a nuclear reactor. And this tumor in Whitman's brain was pressing that button, constantly, relentlessly. Even worse, the tumor's location was disrupting the connections to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is our brake. It governs social rules, logic, and morality. When the amygdala screams attack, the cortex says, "No, stop." In Whitman's brain, the brake lines had been cut, but the gas pedal was being held to the floor with a brick.
I want you to truly imagine this for a moment. You are inside your own mind. A voice is constantly whispering to you, telling you to hate, to harm, to destroy. Your logic, your education, your morality, they are all standing right there screaming, "Don't do this! This is wrong!" On the night he killed his wife and mother, Whitman wrote in his diary about how much he loved them, how deeply he cherished them. But biology is a dictator stronger than love. Neuroscientist David Eagleman calls this a biological storm. As the tumor grew, as the chemical balance in the brain shattered, Charles Whitman's personality, his memories, his very self were slowly erased. In his place, a damaged biological machine took over, programmed only to survive, to hunt, and to destroy. The person who climbed that tower that day, who hunted people through the scope of a rifle, was that truly Charles Whitman? Or had Whitman already drowned inside that tumor, leaving his body behind as a mere shell? In a typical crime story, it is easy to hate the killer. We label him evil and feel relieved. But here, our feelings get complicated, because science whispers a terrifying, cold truth to us. We are nothing more than our brains. And when that brain is invaded by a microscopic cluster of cells, the character, the soul we call us, can dissipate like smoke.
Today, the Charles Whitman case remains at the center of the most heated debates in law schools and neuroscience labs. This case forces us to confront the most fundamental belief of being human: free will. We believe that we make our own decisions. We think we choose good or evil. But if a piece of tissue the size of a hazelnut in your brain can transform you from a loving spouse into a mass murderer, where exactly is that choice? The finger that pulled the trigger belonged to Whitman. He bought the guns. He climbed the tower. But the order came from a tumor. Do you think Charles Whitman was a monster at the top of that tower that day? Or was the 17th victim actually Whitman himself? Perhaps it was both. The human mind is the universe's most complex, most miraculous, yet most fragile structure. A change of a single millimeter can transform a saint into a demon. This story invites us to stop and think before we judge, to look into that dark and unknown biology of human nature. If you want to get lost further in these dark corridors of the mind, to shine a light on the most uncomfortable corners of reality, I'll see you in the next episode. Subscribe and be ready to push the boundaries of your mind.